So welcome, happy July. We're here again.
Bill.
For most of us, it's been hot and rainy and whatnot.
It's beautiful in Chicago.
Yay!
Lucky. You're lucky.
On your screen, you should be seeing the housekeeping stuff. Any issues, hit F5 to refresh your browser. Hopefully, it'll take care of the problem. Presentations will go out the beginning of next week, along with a link to so you can rewatch the presentation. What else? Next Focus Friday. Since we're just starting this one, let's talk about next one.
Next one.
It's in August 18th, same bat time, same bat channel, and we're going to be talking about stack basics, headings, footings, subheads, sublets, oh my, and join techniques.
Yep. And there will be additional, by that time, there will be additional, the rest of the year will be going up slowly, but definitely. So September, October, November, and December will be put up shortly.
Remember, guys, at the end of this session, you'll be asked to fill in a survey. Not only does this help our egos because you guys are so wonderful, but it helps us to determine what you still wish to hear from us. And so when at the beginning of January, we need to put in 12 topics for the rest of the year, we can say, oh, do you remember when they asked us to do this? So we are at your beck and call. And anything that, in our areas that you ask us to do within reason, we are happy to do.
It's always good to show our management that you guys enjoy these things,
right?
So that they will continue to allow us to do them.
Get something out of it, which is more important than enjoyment.
Yeah, we like getting out of the cage that they keep us in. So,
which is our houses. So.
Right. So if you let us come out of the cage by doing these, that's great. That's great. We really appreciate that.
All right. Any other housekeeping things? Going once, going twice. Okay, Mr. Mark, over to you.
All right, guys. Today I'm going to talk about basically how to set up your environment to run maintain. And since many of you are new to Web Focus or only know about Designer, let me give my 30-second overview. Maintain is a part of Web Focus that allows you to create write-back applications. We can write to any kind of database that we support, and I'm going to throw up a list in a little bit. The current tool is available from App Studio, not Designer. It is developed from App Studio only. And if you have your golden key, you're welcome to use Maintain. And if you have any questions upon how it is and what do you do with it and what can you do with it, throw a case into Salesforce and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions and even get you my self-study application if you want. So let's talk today about Maintain and server configuration files. So when you install App Studio, there are a number of changes that you need to make to your configuration files so that Maintain can run correctly. This is especially true if you're using Focus files, but interface files as well. So this presentation discusses what needs to be added to your ETA-SPROF, your SU-PROF, and your ETA-SERV files for Maintain applications to execute. We'll also discuss certain databases and how to set it up to run. Sorry, just trying to link the things on my screen. There we go. Okay, so for the most part, Maintain works right out of the box. You have App Studio installed. You can instantly create HTML pages. And on those HTML pages, you place your Maintain objects and your code. But let's talk about the few things that you need to do for your specific databases. Okay, first things first. Some of you may have run Maintain and it works, but you see Maintain Data Trial as a watermark on your form. Our former owner, Jerry, never wanted anyone to not be able to use our products. So he said, I'll tell you what, anyone, whether they have a license for the product or not, can use it, but it's going to say Maintain Data Trial. And anyone who wants to put this in production should probably want to get rid of that. So on the Web Focus server, there used to be a screen for entering licenses. Well, that screen kind of got lost. So you can no longer enter the license code via one of these cute little GUI screens. But if you are licensed for Maintain and you are getting the Maintain data trial watermark, you can edit your editserv.cfg file, and in the second paragraph under licenses, you'll see it'll say license_maintain, and you can put in the 8 or 9 digit code that you should have because you have a license for the product. Now, once again, if you install the Web Focus with the golden key, we'll give you that. I don't want to put it up on the screen now because I kind of like to know who's running the product. But again, if you're running the application and you're getting the watermark and you are licensed, open a case. We'll be happy to get you going. Your edasprof.prf. Now, this is the most important thing. Your edasprof is run every single time you kick off a Web Focus request. Everything is in here. Where to look for your files, the settings, how to get to your interfaces, joins, anything that you want can be placed inside your edasprof. So there are a couple of things that you need to have, especially for Maintain. The first is your app path. App path sets the search path to a designated list of application names. These refers to the applications under the app root value. And you can, of course, specify multiple application names to extend the search path. I have about 50 applications in my app path, and this slows down processing time because we literally have to search through all the paths. Whenever possible, make your app path succinct as possible. But this is where we're going to look for your resource files, your database files, your master files. Set commit equals on. This is under discussion. Your Maintain applications may or may not run with set commit equals on, but especially if you're writing to focus files, we tell you you should have it. This is because when we update our databases, we go down a specific path specifically for Maintain. If you were using Modify to update your files, and yes, Modify is still around and some people over 60 are still using it, silence on that end, you should set commit equals off. Otherwise, you will get a strange warning message that something is wrong. It's not always very specific. And finally, we need your use statements. Now, these again are for focus files. We're going to discuss interface files in a minute. But in order for Maintain to use your focus files, we have to not only open them read-write, but open them so multiple users can get at them. This is because there are many Maintain commands that have multiple agents operating on your data files. So the default focus database server, or FDS, or SU, or sync machine, is Foxu01. You can have multiple sync machines. You can rename this, but by default, out of the box, it's Foxu01. So use movies on Foxu01 says that I'm using the movies focus file and multiple applications will be using it. These are the interface files that Maintain supports. We haven't updated this in a little while. I know some of my users are using Snowflake now to read their databases. Snowflake is not great to write databases, so we need to use the SQL ODBC, which is fine. But again, we certainly can read-write a large number of interface files. Your edasprof. Oh, I'm sorry, your edasprof continued. Should you be going against an interface? In this case, I have SQLMS and MySQL. You need to have the connection attributes inside of your edasprof. Now, when you don't need to build this by hand. You can use our database screens, our get data screens from the the server console. But you'll notice that these contain the connection attributes that have the name, the server name, the security type, user and credentials, etc. These do need to be inside of your EDA-SPROF, otherwise WebFocus won't know the name of your server or how to get to it, and Maintain won't be able to write to it. And there is one more thing I want to discuss, and that's loopback. We have a number of customers who are running their previously created applications like in 8.2 or 8.1 in 8.207 or 9.1.9.2. When we use a call or an exec, we're actually looking for a server called loopback or the default ediserve. If you get an error saying loopback not recognized or ediserve not recognized, you can set a user ID and password inside your EDA-SPROF for loopback, and that will take care of that. So again, exec, which has a maintain perform a table, or call, which has a maintain perform another maintain, we're typically looking for loopback server or ediserve, and you may need to define that inside of your EDA-SPROF as well. The last thing we'll mention interface files is SU-prof. The SU-prof, once again, is for simultaneous update for focus files. In most cases, it'll contain the same map path as an ediserve, EDA-SPROF, and this is so we can find the location of the focus files that we have uses for in our EDA-SPROF, and this is the app path that we need in our SU-prof. So once you have this set up, your applications should run perfectly. But let's talk about what you need to have in your master files for Maintain to be able to read and write to them. Any file that we are trying to access with Maintain, especially a focus file, must have a key field or key fields. So let's look at the movies file, because as you know, that's my favorite file. And we look at the seg type. The seg type is an S1. The S is how we sort low to high, and the 1 is one key. If it was SH, it'd be sorted high to low. When we add our movies as a data source in our Maintain application, we see there's a cute little key next to the movie code. Once again, this tells Maintain that movie code is the key field in movies. It's the only key, and we're going to use this to match on, to include, and to delete. Update is, of course, all of the non-key fields. But Maintain really, really, really wants to have the first field in the segment as the key. Let's look at the car file for a second. The car file is multi-segment. All of the segments are S1 with the exception of specs, which is a unique segment. When working with Maintain, a unique segment is considered part of the segment above it. So to access length, width, height, etc., we would actually just reference the body segment and it would come in. When we look in App Studio, we see that country, car, model, and body type all have key fields. Specs, being a unique segment, does not. We would not be able to work on a focus file that only had a unique segment. I don't even know if that's allowed. But again, Maintain really wants the first field or fields in your segment to be the key fields, and without them, we cannot write to the file. Let's talk interface files for a minute. We have our master files and our access files. Yes, I know focus files can have an access file, but we're not going to talk about that now. So most of the time, my interface files have an S0 as the seg type, sorted low to high, and the 0 is here because we don't tell WebFocus what the keys are in the master file. We put them in the access file. So in my review scores access file, I have keys equals 1. which once again will tell maintain in web focus that my ID field is the key. So again, this is the older way to do it, as keys equals 1. The newer way is to say key or keys equals field / field. So this way, my data comments table will actually have 2 keys, batch num and content date. Maintain really wants these to be the first 2 fields in your segment, in your database. So whenever possible, or in order to make this work, batch num and comment date would be the first 2 fields in my SQL table, and I will know that these 2 are the keys. And if I were to open this inside of App Studio, these 2 fields would have keys next to them. And that's it, guys. That's all I have for you today. Maintain applications can be created and run in a very short amount of time. Make sure your environment is set up to run them. Read write to the interfaces, use statements for your focus files, and you should be good to go. I'm going to stop sharing. Are there any questions?
Just a comment, Mark, about for the server. The Flock SU01 is the server, the SU, the FDS that is actually started by the Edit server. Focus also has the ability to actually start an independent server for SU, which is what Focus does, and you can actually have in your Odin config file the Flock SU, which is 01 and 00 and 01, which is the Ediserve sync machine. You can also have sync machines that are independent, not managed by the Edit server, but able to be accessed for data. So you can actually share data from a Focus application into a web Focus application or maintain by using the Odin config file and the use statement that's in there that would point to the sync machine that has the data. Actually, let me check that, Mark. Have you hit a sync machine that's not managed by the server?
No.
Have you tried it?
No.
Okay.
There are 2 questions, though. The first question is, do Focus files need a host if you only need to read them? Maintained files cannot be open read-only. If you wish to read a Focus file that's not going to be written to, what we do is we exec a table or a procedure to read the data and bring it back into the maintain, and we can do it that way. So in that way, we don't need to have a host. We don't need to have key fields if we're just going to read it. But again, we can't do that directly with maintain. We use table and an exec statement. I also saw a question about commit, and we absolutely can issue commit statements in maintain. A commit will not, when we save a record, it's kind of in limbo. But if we want other people to be able to read it as well or see it as well, the update, we issue a commit, and then it's saved to the database. Otherwise, if you're like the only person using the application, all commits are issued at the end time of the application. How do you set up hyperstates to use a table and maintain? I have absolutely no idea. I apologize. That's you can put that in the comments of your survey, and I will look into it.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Thanks for your attention. And again, if you're interested in learning more about maintain, open a case in Salesforce, put the word maintain in the title with a little more information, and I'll be happy to get back to you.
Enjoy.
Great. Very good, Mark.
All right, I'm up next.
You're up next.
All right, I'm going to talk about table basics. Nothing really thought-provoking, but in case you're new to the product and you haven't seen this, or maybe there's something I'm going to show you that you forgot about, and it's like, wow, maybe I can use that. All right. So components of a report. So you have a report. We started with table file name. We'll get into that in a little bit. We have our fields that we want to see, and then we have how we want to see them. So we have grouping. Are you going to group the data, sort the data, collate, aggregate? Do you want to do this horizontally, vertically? Do you want to have these subheads, subfoots, which is more in detail in August? For the columns, we have the verb objects, which are the things that you're seeing on the report. But then you might want to do calculations based on those columns. So you can do your own calculations using compute. We can do totaling. We can total at the report level, and we can subtotal at the sorting aggregation level. And then we have our headings, footings. So here's the basic syntax: table file, and then your synonym name, your master name, your verb. Well, how many verbs are there? Mr. Greenhouse, how many verbs are there?
A lot of them mean the same thing, like sum
Right.
and write are synonymous. Print and list, functionally the synonymous, except list gives you a number and count.
Right.
Yeah, so there's like 5 or 6, but there's technically only 2. There's sum and print. And there's list, which is print. There's list and, list and sum. Print is just list with a no print on the focus column.
The count is
Technically
actually,
there's 2, but we have others that are synonyms for the other ones.
yeah. All right.
So print is your detail and sum is your aggregation. Yeah, I've seen some code that had write and add, and it's like, where did all these come from? Then you have your verb and then your verb objects. These are the columns, whether they are physically in the database from the synonym, or there was something that you created. It was an expression that you had in a define. We can also add computes, which will take the aggregated values based on the sort level and then do the calculations at that point in time. Then we have our sorting. Are we going down the page with by or across the page with across? Filters, these are your ifs and your wheres. And then other, so your headings, footings, subheads, subfeats.
Subfeed.
And then your styling, and then the end. Now, I present it in this order. The heading, you could actually put table file synonym and then the heading before your verb. I tend to put it at the end because in some of the older versions, you had some issues if you had where the position of your heading was because of how the internal matrix was built. So I always put it at the end after my filters, but again, it shouldn't really matter where you put it. We're kind of a free form type of language. When you're creating reports, do everything you need to do to get the data and the columns that you want. Don't worry about the styling. Save the styling for last. Okay. To create your report, we start with table file car. This identifies what file you're reporting against, in this case, the car file. If you're using an SU, you have to make sure you have a use statement. We'll give you errors if we can't find the master, the synonym. We'll give you errors if we don't find any data. So here's an example with the verb and the verb objects. So what type of report is this? Well, we're doing a sum, so it's an aggregation. If it was detail, it would be print. We're looking at dealer cost, retail cost, and then we're computing the profit. We're going to sort now. We're going to sort down the page by country, by car, by model. Now, in this particular case, since model is the lowest denominator for identifying a unique car, we're actually doing a detail report, but we're summing the values. So let that sink in. Had I done a print, I would have got exactly the same result. All right, option. So on the by, we can add by country subtotal. We can do by country subhead, by country subfoot. You can add these extra parameters on the by level, or you can add them by themselves. If you add them by themselves, you're going to do an on country subtotal or on country subhead. When would you do this? If you're doing conditional subheads. So you might want to have one subhead for England and another subhead for France. So you can add a when at the end of the subhead, which we'll get into next month. We're going to do where country equals England or Japan, our filtering. If is a simple test. So an if test is if field equals value, or if field equals value 1 or value 2 or value 3. You can't do if country equals car. You can't do field to field calculations with an if. It has to be field relation value. A where, on the other hand, can be any expression, including compound ands and ands and ors. Okay, when in doubt, always use where. And I say that because we try to, yes, I see a hand.
Just a comment, general, as you said, the headings and footings typically come in a request. You may want to always put them at the end, because then you can use computed fields in them. Whereas if you put them right after the table, you have no idea, the processor has no idea about computed fields because you haven't issued them yet. So you really get problems. So putting the headings at the end gives you the ability to put the computed fields within the heading.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get when I said put them at the end. I couldn't remember why, so thank you. So if you want to put a computed field value in a heading or footing, then you want to make sure that the heading physically comes after the verb and verb object. Thank you, Ms. Greenhouse. All right, so when in doubt, always use where, because on it, I want to say if, but I don't want to say if. If you have a where condition that could have been an if, so if you said where country equals England, behind the scenes, we're going to look at that and turn it into an if anyway. So you're not losing any performance issues if you do the where all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, then we have the heading, and again, I always put them at the end just for safety.
There's a question, Walter.
Yes.
Should there be a semicolon at the end of the where?
The debate on the semicolon.
It's documented, but sometimes
I never use them. Should you have it? Probably. Just for making it more easily readable by someone who knows SQL. The only time in a where in SQL is absolutely necessary is in a where-based join.
Mm-hmm.
So you have several where. If you have several where statements, you have to end them in a semicolon. Or if you're doing SQL pass-through, because SQL requires the end of the select to be a semicolon. But just for a normal standard table usage, you can put them if you're comfortable putting them. But if you forget them, it's not going to hurt anything at this point in time. That's not to say that 10 generations down or 10 versions of Focus down, what are we on, 9? So
9,
Focus
yeah.
20 might do some code tightening and require that you use semicolons at the end of the where. So, yeah, I don't use them. For table, it's up to you. Again, it's probably always safer to use them.
Probably a good idea, because if the parser of the table request can recognize an end of the where condition, like the next word is end on a line by itself, or heading, it knows it's ended. But if there's any question, you could get errors, so it's always safest to put the semicolon.
Right. Yeah, that's correct.
All right, heading, this is a sample report using the car file. Again, in August, we'll go how to add fields and different things into the headings. And you can also have a footing. We end the request with the word end, because otherwise Focus doesn't know. So here it is all together. We run it. And here's our report. We got country, car, model, dealer cost, retail cost, profit. There's all sorts of settings, which I'm not going to get into, to control the output of the report, because notice country, England, is only on the first line for England. It's not on the preceding lines. There's a setting where you can say by display equals on, and then that would then put England on every line. I have a question for you guys. Dealer cost and retail cost don't have decimal points, but profit does. Anybody know why? Yes, Mr. Greenhouse, I know
Oh,
you
yeah.
know why.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Greenhouse.
Because the default format is D12.2 if you don't specify a format.
So my compute profit doesn't specify a format, so we defaulted it to D12.2.
You have to be very careful if you don't specify formats, because you may find that what you get isn't what you expect. So don't play with alphas and put them into a defaulted field method.
Jeffrey,
End up with an error.
D29.2, close, D12.2. But you're on the right track.
Yep.
All right. Notice on this output, we have page 1 at the top. Well, that doesn't really mean much to me, especially if I'm going to HTML. So I can add on table set page no page, which will remove that. We're going to do no paging. So yeah, Jeffrey just hit the wrong key. No problem. If I do set page no page, notice that that page number now is gone. And then we're going to add some styling. I'm just going to do a generic EN warm style, which is included with the product. The EN is basically the English version, and warm gives you a nice warm fuzzy when you see the output. I don't know why they called it warm.
It probably has more to do with the colors that are associated with that particular style sheet.
Okay. Like on my TV, where I have warm 1, warm 2, cool.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Ask a quick question.
Sure.
Maybe.
It's an issue I've always had. On table set page or any set something equal value. If you put in the equal sign, it gives you an error.
Right.
Shouldn't the parser be smart enough to know that the equal sign should be ignored?
Yeah.
One would think.
And one would think that that's the case, especially
No,
given
you
the fact
submit an
that,
enhancement.
I mean, right now,
Never done that.
Yeah, our parsing now has changed considerably over the years. And everything you're looking at right there turns into a very complicated tree now. So it should be smart. It should be that smart. It actually should be that smart. It shouldn't make any difference where you put the heading with reference to the actual running of the report. Shouldn't make any difference.
Here's an even better one, Mr. Greenhouse. Aziz asked, have we resolved the next line total for Excel? And it's not just Excel, it's in any output where the subtotal is not on the same line. You know, when you get the 2 lines?
Yeah.
Because you don't have enough space to account for the value. You don't have enough by fields to account for what you might be putting in the output. No, I don't believe that has ever been fixed. Well,
no, I don't think it has. I think that ultimately is, that's a structural issue.
But technically, if you're going to Excel or if you're going to HTML, you should be able to make that column as long as you need to.
Well,
but that's just me.
I think what's happening is that we're defaulting. We have a very long, the field that the lines get jumped to the next line because the field that basically is going in there at the beginning of that line is huge, and everything gets pushed, and there's an automatic wrap.
No. This is where you only have one by,
right,
and the by isn't big enough to account for the asterisk total field name.
Right. That's correct.
So then we put the values underneath it.
We skip
so that we don't have an overlay.
Right. That's exactly right.
But if you're doing the HTML, then that first column, they should be able to make that first column even bigger. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes. But yeah, that's we have workarounds, we have techniques. Most of the time they work. They don't work 100% of the time. So if you have something specific you want to look at, we might be able to have some type of
the next line
solution.
total.
Basically, you create a dummy blank field that you do your first buy on,
Mhm.
which hopefully will be big enough to push everything over.
Blanks ignore HTML. HTML ignores blanks, so that would work fine.
Yeah.
But we still put it on a separate line, I believe. I'll have to double check HTML. I haven't done that in a while. Lots of thinking points.
Mhm.
So this next slide is basically a recap of all the things you can do in a table. Notice I have heading first here, but again, we suggest you put it at the end. We got our buys, we got our rankings, a whole bunch of more advanced things that's outside my scope here. I will mention record limit, read limit. If you want to limit the output lines, you can use those. It used to be read limit only limited how many records you read, but somewhere along the way that got changed and somehow it turns into a record limit, right, Mr. Greenhouse?
Mhm.
And it used to be the number of calls that were issued, but for SQL, you're only issuing one call, so it didn't
Right.
make much sense.
Right.
But if you are using SQL and you use a read limit, it will pass to the RDBMS as a limiter. Like in Oracle, it'll say where row number is less than or equal to value.
Mhm.
We got on table hold, on table PC hold. You can do column totals, row totals, lots of stuff in here. If you want to add an additional file that has the same field names and the same formats, you can use a more file and then the file name, and then you can do record selection criteria because everything you're going to see is going to be based on the main request, verbs and verb objects. So here, the only thing you really need to specify is the filter. And then you end it. Notice I have run and quit also.
We have a
So-
question here.
Okay.
Do we have an option for code compiling or syntax checking?
What does that mean? All our code is now compiled, technically, kind of, sort of.
Well, focus is
part.
an interpreted language, so there is no, you
So we compiled
you
all the
run.
computations.
Right. All of our computations are compiled, but it's not like COBOL or C that basically has to be compiled before you can run it.
For syntax checking, there's a set, it's set X retrieval, XRETRIEVAL equals off. Did I get that right? All right, you
Right.
cringed.
Use XRET and be done with it.
Right.
Okay, good. Equals off, and then that will run your query and it'll parse it, but you will not return any data.
Right.
That's especially helpful if you have SQL traces turned on and you just want to see the select statement without having to run and bring back data from the RDBMS.
Yep.
But for actually we used to have compiled modifies, but once we got into the 64-bit versions, we no longer have that capability.
That's correct. That's correct.
I have at the end of my page here, I have end, run, and quit. End says I'm done, run the report, give me my output, we're happy. Run says run the report, but keep the file open.
Mm-hmm.
So when you run the request, the table file name says, okay, I have to go out and find the synonym. I have to see what fields are in the synonym. There's all things I have to do to that synonym to get information in order to create the report. It's overhead. So if I'm going to do another report against the same master right after this one, I can do a table file car, print, blah, 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 run, and then I can do another request, sum dealer cost by country, and then end. And then I'll get 2 reports out of it with only having to read the metadata one time.
Correct.
The quit says, I changed my mind. Table file car, print country, quit. Doesn't do anything. But if you're running interactive focus and you're at a command prompt and you type it and it's already in the buffer, there's really no way to get out and not run it unless you do quit.
Mm-hmm.
When do you recommend using dialog manager commands -run and -exit?
Huh.
Now we're getting to a whole other topic from table basics. But in general, if you have anything that doesn't have a dash in front of it is a focus command. Anything that has a dash in front of it is a dialog manager. Dialog manager commands run immediately. As soon as it's issued, it's run. You're done. Anything that doesn't have a dash gets put in a stack. So if I say set pause equals off, which is one of our set commands, it doesn't actually process until it sees a dash run, or you exit your procedure.
Or you reference a variable that requires a run.
So even better is file def. If I needed report against a file that I have to file def to it, file def doesn't have a dash in front of it. So if I say file dash file car disk and point to where my file is, and then say table file car, it's going to say there's no file def for a car because it was in the buffer, but you never actually ran it. So you do your file def and then put a dash run. So now the file is available, and then your table file will work. And Art's thinking that over, and he's saying, well, if it's sequential,
My
it shouldn't
question
really
is,
matter.
if you have a file that followed by a table, both
Yeah.
of them get written to the stack before they get
Right.
executed.
I know.
All right.
It's an example.
The idea is that the focus commands are stacked.
But the problem is on the server, though, when you run on the server, it's going to parse the whole procedure. So it's not going to run the file def, but it's going to check that you have a table file and if there's an allocation for it. So it's all a timing issue at that point.
Mhm.
Dash exit is if you want to stop a procedure. So I'm done. I get to a certain point, I'm going to exit the procedure. If you're calling one procedure from another, then when you do the dash exit on the called procedure, it will then return to the one that called it.
Yeah, and it also runs whatever you had. If you use a dash quit, it'll throw it away. I mean, the run, exit, and quit, and the dash run, dash exit, and dash quit are similar. They're parallel. One is in table, the other is in the dialog manager, and they do the same things.
Okay. All right, that's all I had.
Okay.
Any questions?
All right. Let me share
Can
my
I
screen.
add a little note on that?
Certainly.
Yeah, the idea of using a dash run after a table file request is essential. If you're going to do a record check, such as dash if records equals 0, then go to a no data routine or something. I have seen countless instances where people did not do a dash run after the.
See, technically, if you do like amper lines or amper records and an if after the table, it should have already issued the run for you.
It'll force it.
But if you did a dash, if you just do table file such and such, END, and the next line says dash if amper records something, it's going to see the dash if before it's actually executed, because that's a dialog manager command that actually gets executed before the table command if there's no dash run after it. Isn't that correct?
What version are you in? No.
Well, you know me, I've been in 100 different, I've been in versions since PC Focus.
We'll double check it because, like we said, it should issue the dash run, but who knows if that might have got changed at some point.
Yeah, maybe
it should be issuing a dash run
to prevent that from happening.
Evaluation of the statistical variable.
Right.
The problem comes up if you put a dash if amper records in the middle of the request, then the dash run says you don't have a full request.
Right. Yeah. Or the famous one is the dash type, which if you put table file, then you have a dash type, and then you have your dash run, and the dash type is basically a print something from there. It doesn't. There's nothing there because it hasn't run yet, or there's not. If it's pulling something out of the request, then there's nothing to pull out because the request hasn't been run yet. So especially with dash types, you definitely have to use a dash run prior to issuing the dash type because there won't be anything to work with.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wait, there's a
Thanks,
couple
Ralph.
more questions. I don't know if we want to get
All
to.
right.
You mentioned opening a case in Salesforce. Does that mean TIBCO does a lot of reporting against Salesforce internally using Web Focus? I'd like to say we did, but I don't know. What I do is I know people that have extracts from Salesforce, and they did reporting against the extract. But we do have a Salesforce interface, do we not?
Yeah, I think we have some sort of an interface with Salesforce. Yeah.
So I can't say if we're doing it ourselves directly to Salesforce.
Now, Salesforce is basically sitting on top of Oracle, so effectively our interface there is the Oracle interface. All right. And I think actually Salesforce can probably be built on top of other things, but we're working at a lower level. Whether or not we have something that goes into the Salesforce itself, the application catalog, that's a good question. That one I couldn't guarantee you.
And can you briefly mention where in file? I can't briefly mention anything.
Thank you.
That's great.
So where in file, so you say where field in file and you give it a file name. So you have to have a file def, or if you're on the mainframe, a dynam, for the file that you're using, that you're checking for the existence in. Basically what you're looking for, where in file, this should be the first part of the file. You shouldn't need, I don't believe you need a master or synonym.
No, you don't.
There's a limit of 32,000 entries, or there used to be. That might not be anymore because we tried to get rid of most of those limits.
Yeah.
So like if you want to look for England and France, then you would have an external file that had England on line 1, France on line 2, and then you can do a file def to your in file and then say where country in file and then your file name in file.
Yeah.
And then that should work. If you're not getting that to work, let us know and we'll see what we can do to help you.
Okay.
Hopefully it's not broken.
Yeah, now that file has to be allocated or file defed. Make sure that we know before we start the request where that file is, because otherwise we're not going to be able to find it.
So you might need to add a dash run after your file def.
Right. Keeps coming up empty.
Okay, sorry there. Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. Let's
Great
jump.
interaction.
All right, super. Let's jump. Let me do a share. Let me actually see, where's this going to be? Where is this going to end up if I run this?
The difference between hold and save is hold will create a master, where save will not. That's the main difference. The default formats are different. Hold does an internal, save does a format alpha. But the main difference is the default format, and the hold will give you a master, a synonym, and save will not.
Okay, there we go. Can you see that? Okay.
We can.
All right. Yeah, we're going to talk about, let's move on and talk a little bit about graphics and graphs and how we do certain things with the language. I want to spend some time talking about the language aspects of dealing with graphics, including the HTML5 and some of the older technology that we have, going all the way back to the very beginning in the 1970s. Because we've actually been cognizant of that, of graphics capabilities and requirements ever since the product started. So let's just dive right in. Let's see, let's run this. And where did I hide that? Where did I hide it? Not that one. Okay. All right. Okay, there's our standard disclaimer, which I usually put up. Table and graph, the two languages that we use to differentiate between when running a report looking just for data that we're going to put in some sort of columnar output or some sort of numeric output versus some sort of graphic representation. Now, obviously in the web focus world, we're probably leaning a lot heavier on the graph side, simply because that capability is gotten considerably better. But originally, the product was designed basically to handle numerics, and it was a tremendous benefit. The language, and Walter just went over the table language, and you should be able to spot all the basics here. This is a simple request. Now, ultimately, when we first came out, this was a 4th generation language, still is a 4th generation language. The idea here was really, how do I turn that into a graph? Well, I can turn that into a graph by just simply changing my table file to graph file. The idea being that the same language that we use to retrieve the data, it's the same. All right, there's no difference between my headings, my verbs, my selection criteria, all that's the same. All right. Where we see differences, you can see right here on tables, the things that the output, and we have some new technology. We basically now use slightly different than when we started from, but we use some very simple on table syntax to indicate how we want to put our data out. The set commands that we can look at, the on table sets that we use for graph, and also some on table, the hold basically is the type. And there we end up looking for specific chart types. So let's just take a look at some of those. Now, here's all of the syntax from the point of view of a graph. If I look at graph, it's a little bit different than table. You'll see that we do have the top part is pretty much the same, the on graph, the verbs, the verb objects. You can see we use the same verb objects. Our sorts are basically the same, bys and acrosses. We can use any kind of selection criteria, including conditional selection, along with headings and footings. Where we start to see some differences is on table. We have on table in the table world, but in graph we have on graph, and we have a number of things basically directing us to to graphs, including JS chart, which effectively pushes it into our graph capability. You'll see there, one of the big ones is the look graph, the set look graph, and we'll talk about that, along with the on graph set. And there are some optional parameters that we have there that actually allow us to make some dynamic changes with reference to what the chart's actually going to look like. There's also a big part of graphing is style. And from the point of view of style, we have the JSON-based stuff, which is coming out of the HTML5, which is the graph_JS. The graph script is what we used to know as Moonbeam. It's a legacy graph API. Methods and properties that's still in the product and can still be used. And we have the web focus style sheet declarations, which is in effect a focus style, which can be used. And we'll talk a little bit about that today because there are some interesting stuff that changed there fairly recently. All right, enough of that. Let's move on. Set commands. Set commands are basic to the product. We have set commands. They're basically switches, and there are, I don't know, 500 or 600 of them that you can use with the product. You don't ever usually see that many. A lot of them are internal. A lot of them we hide from you. A lot of them we don't tell you about because we don't want you to know them. We control them, but there are a lot that you can change. Now, these are the ones that are currently set up specifically to adjust the graph environment that you're going to be working with, and most of them are fairly straightforward. As you can see, you've got your here. All right, you've got your 3D. There's a number of them. For bars, you'll see the bar num and the B stack, which effectively are turned off. That's numbering the bars and stacking data elements within the bars. Embedding the heading is turned off initially with this, and these all can be set on. You can turn a grid on and off. The H's all have to do with horizontal things. The V's all have to do with vertical things. So you've got your horizontal axis and your vertical axis, and you can see that there are a number of things that can be set, including the automatics, which are currently set to on and off, which basically pull in defaults that we've got set up for all the other things within that particular group, right? So those are fairly straightforward. The V0 is an on and off, which allows you to deal with missing values, whether we ignore them or whether we actually store them. Look graph is probably the big one, and we're going to dive and take a look graph. Basically is what tells you what kind of report you're going to actually be working with. When given the data that I pulled back, how do I tell it what kind of report I want to see? Well, that's fairly straightforward, easy to do. Let's see. Let's go take a look. And there are lots of chart types that we have. If you take a look at the doc, if you take a look and you go into Web Focus and just take a look at the charts, you've got a lot. These are all available and their variations within each one of them. I'm not going to spend the time going through all of them. That would be a waste of my time and your time. Take a look at, you take a look at them and play with them and see what they're going to give you. If I have a request and I use the on-table set look graph bar or V bar or H bar, this is a V bar, a vertical bar. This is the thing that I'm going to end up with. Now, this is the result of this request. Fairly straightforward. It's a graph request. I'm summing a number of fields across I've got one sort, and that sort is an across product category. You'll notice that I'm going to output this into JS chart, which is going to basically direct it into my charting capabilities. I'm using look graph basically, which is I'm pointing at VBar. I want a vertical bar. I then have my on-graph set style, in which case I'm going to include my default English IA default combined style file. If you get a chance, you might want to take a look at it. If you're a coder and you like to monkey around with things, go take a look at this file. It's huge. It's got all the default styles that we have in place. As a cascading style sheet, this basically is going to be in operation unless you override it. So there are elements in here that are basically from all of our style capabilities, including the focus style. So you'll see that there's possibilities. There's a lot in there that you can change if you don't like it. There are a lot of things that you can monkey around with. In this particular case, we're overriding the series basically to change the colors, right? But the default colors are not light green, coral, light blue, and burley wood. All right, they are different. As a result, we didn't like that, so you can go in and change those if you want. That's the kind of thing that you actually have the capability of doing very easily with the language. And once you know that that capability is there, you can actually go ahead and do it. Pie charts, they're probably one of the least, they're very often used. They're not particularly good for graphing. They don't really tell you that much. They're good for giving you relative amounts or relative sizes. Code, again, simple, pie graph pie. Again, here, I'm using the same style sheet file, but here when I'm actually turning off my legend, and this is done using the graph.js, and I can actually turn that on or off. There are a lot of possible actions that are available there, and if you take a look at some of the examples for the style files, you can take a look at them. The mouse over indicator, which basically gives you control over what happens when you mouse over something. Basically, it's turned on, and it basically is going to turn things, in this case, yellow. So you have controls there that you can change if you don't like what we do. Again, we've decided the colors are going to be different, and we have changed the colors, and that's what you end up seeing. All right.
Walter, there's a
Yeah.
question. Can the divisions and colors be set dynamically, or do they have to be set every time?
The color, when you're developing, you've got all kinds of possibilities. you can do that. All right. Now, if in terms of actually giving the end user the ability to change the colors, I don't know that well, you probably could do that, but that's a lot more work than you probably want to get into.
Well,
You know,
Walter, I think the question is, if you don't assign the colors, will Web Focus assign default colors?
absolutely. That's what that
Okay.
style sheet file is all about. All right. That style sheet file has defaults for everything. So that if you don't assign something, you don't have to worry about it. We've taken care of it, and you'll get what we decide is the best. And that's up to you. You can take it or you can change it. And that's exactly, that's perfectly okay. All right. Let's go over here. Let's go. Okay, that one, that's this. Oh, let me go back. This is a vertical area. This is an area chart that basically is going to take a look at the data and create an area based upon the data values. Notice they're stacked. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that you can do with this. In this particular request, you can see the look graph equal area, V area vertical. We're using a define here. The define is a functionality that allows us to create temporary fields before we do any data retrieval. So we have the ability to actually use the data we're retrieving to build fields that we can then subsequently use for selection or for display. It really depends on what we need. And we can build it at that before. Now, compute, which is the other kind of expression that we deal with, is an expression that we can use after we've retrieved the data. All right, which is also, so you actually have two times at which you can in Focus and Web Focus where you can actually change or create temporary fields to use. Once prior to the retrieval, so that we can use it during the retrieval, or subsequent to the retrieval and the aggregation, following what we call the aggregation into what we call the matrix. Once the matrix has been created, internal matrix, we can then read that data out, and at that point we do the computes, and all the computes. Any of the selections that are done with a total, like an if total or a where total, are done at that point. Any sorts done on a total, such as by total or a cross total, are done at that point. All right. Again, nothing complicated here, but if you want to change these things, you do have the capability. And the point here is to take a look at what you have and see what you can change. Now, when you're building these, you do actually have the option to change some of these things in the designer tool or in IA or in App Studio. Once you've created it, you're not restricted. You can go back in and make these changes. Now, not everything is changeable in the tools. Some of those defaults are going to go in there whether you like it or not. And there's no real way to get at it short of going into the code and making the changes. And that's perfectly okay. We can't give you everything in the front end tools. I mean, the tool would be huge. The code is there so that you can actually make those changes. And once you know how to do it, it's a lot easier to do it that way. Now, here's a 3D chart. Again, look graph 3D chart. Created very simply. This stuff is really easy to generate. Again, here all I'm doing is I'm making the legend visible. I'm adding some new colors, the same colors as I added before, so we can make life simple. All right, those are the look graphs. Now the look graphs actually there, you saw lots of other charts types, and they all have look graphs, and you can go take a look at those if you really want to spend some time. If you're into the charting, I would suggest doing that. Multiple graphs. I have the ability to actually have multiple graphs visible at the same time, and I can do it a number of ways. I can either have one graph for each by field, all right, so I have multiple graphs on the same page, or I can turn it on, in which case all of my by fields are merged into a single chart. Or I can use the advanced, which allows me to control that. The number of graphs, which is multi-graph, how many sort fields to put in the legend, and how many sort fields to actually use on the x-axis. All right. This
Walter,
is, yes.
before you go on, a question was asked: if you make a change manually to the graph and then open it up in the tool again, will your changes be wiped out?
Probably. Depends on how you're doing it. If you're an IA, yeah, it's going to do that. There's no question. In App Studio, it may wipe it out. It depends. I mean, the way that we save stuff, we don't, when you take a look at what we're actually creating for the code that we're writing, all of these things are code writers. They write code that's going to be executed by the engine. And the code that we write is not just the it's not just the requests. It includes also all of the codes that we need in order to be able to remanipulate the screens. In other words, if you're on a designer or an IA screen, all of the basic elements that are required for that are stored in the request that you're creating. So if you go into IA and make a change to the request, the tool knows there's been a change made, and it will automatically say, sorry, I can't open this in the tool anymore because I don't know, I can't guarantee that it was the same one that I created, and it may blow up. So under those circumstances, you'll be automatically thrown back into the editor, in which case you're going to have to change it from there. So in terms of making changes like this, you build it in a tool, and then go, once you're happy with it, then if you want to manipulate, you can just go into the code and start manipulating, but you're going to be working at the code level from that point on, generally. Okay, does that answer that question? Okay.
Most of the changes you've shown so far are things that can be done directly in the tool.
Yeah. Now, there are some things we'll see. Yeah, most of this is done, and I'm showing you where the code is, just to give you the idea that you can do this. You're not restricted only to what you see in the tool. All right. The tool is basically a code writer and is setting things up. There are, I'm sure and I don't know whether we pull it all across. There are some very interesting examples of what you can do outside of the tool with stuff that has been created. In other words, you can use JavaScript and an HTML5 to generate some very interesting graphics that you could never open in a tool. It's not possible. But that's okay. The idea here is to give you the idea to show you ultimately that this is all language based. All right. It's part of it's web focus language. Some of it is going to be JavaScript. Some of it's going to be JSON. Some of it's going to be what we call the Moonbeam API, and some of it's going to be just plain old focus code. But you can manipulate that. All right. In terms of the merge, GR merge allows me to bring these things together, and in this particular case, this particular graph is actually merged. This is a GR merge on, and it basically is, where's the code? It's right here. It's merging on. It's actually bringing, it's a cross product category by brand type. The brand type effectively is going to be the individual graphs. If I had it off, I would have one for each brand type, right? But I don't. I have one, and it has all of the brand types in the same graph. So it's actually collapsing those 5 different graphs, or 7 different graphs, yes, into the same graph. So you have an option there. That's actually a pretty good one. In the focus language, in our style, all right, and you see that this is where you see bucket here, and I want to talk a little bit about bucket, because bucket is an interesting concept. It allows us to assign functionality to various, or assign data elements to various functionalities, right? Which is actually pretty cool. In this particular case, we're going to use the bar graph, and we're going to allow you to add. To show you, we're going to basically tell you, I've got a number of columns that I'm going to be using here. I want to use the COGS US and the gross profit US on the y-axis, and I want to use the product category on the x-axis. And this is now done using this bucket syntax, all right? This actually is fairly straightforward, makes life a lot simpler. And effectively, this gives us exactly what we got. X-axis, I've got my cost of goods and my gross profits, and my y-axis, I've got my the amount. This functionality, right? There are quite a few things that are available to you within buckets. What kind of buckets are there? Well, I've got a bucket. You can put into a bucket, you can assign things to a row. Makes sense. We just saw that. You can assign it to a column, all right, which will put it into the column for the matrix in the grid. Color, you can assign a field to the legend using color, all right. If it happens to be a measure, it's going to create a gradient. You can assign a measure. Basically, it assigns the field values as data values of the chart. Now, this may or may not be associated with the axis. I can assign it to the x-axis and the y-axis, which is what we've seen before. I can also assign a data value to the size. So as the data value increases or decreases, the size of the marker or the bar will actually increase or decrease. So you have additional elements here. By doing this, you have the ability to actually use more of the elements to indicate change in the data that you're looking at or comparisons. I can add fields to the tooltip. All right, very cool. I can assign detail to the lowest level. I can create a slider, which is a very, very, very useful thing. I can generate a slider by using this. I can assign let's try that again. I can assign the data elements to a specific page, so I can have charts on separate pages if I want. And in the map world, I can set things up as latitude or longitude, and I can even use this to set a location for specific polygons or symbols used either in bubble maps or chloroplasts. So bucket actually allows me, when I'm using this, to actually specify how I want this to be used. All right. And that's basically how we do it. And you have the ability to do this. Now, this is done under the covers for you, but you can also make some adjustments that we might not necessarily allow you to in a request. So you have the option there. This is the syntax that we're using. And if you want to play with it, you can. In this particular case, I'm setting up a row and column matrix. All right. Color and size. I want to change this particular case. I'm going to use one bucket to adjust the size. This happens to be on the MSRP, and you can see that the MSRP now, the size of the bar, the width of the bar actually changes based upon the value. The larger the value, the wider the bar. All right, this kind of thing is completely controllable. And now here's a case where I've got multiple. I want to have multiple y-axes. More than one. Yeah.
So this question, is the tooltip like a bubble containing text?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so if you do a hover over type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what tooltip is. Yeah. And you can put anything. You can put a lot of. The tooltip is a very powerful little tool. I mean, you can put a lot of stuff in there. Okay, this is the multiple y-axes. I want to have a request that generates more than one y-axis. So I want to show multiple requests or multiple graphs with the same x-axis, but I want multiple y-axes. I could do that very straightforward. I just define the multiple in each one of these, the y-axis, y-axis 2, and y-axis 3. You can see I've got two fields assigned to the y-axis 2. And when I run, all right, when I run, that's exactly what I end up with. All right. All right.
So, well, another question, can we use it in Excel and PDF and any output format any styled output format, correct?
Yeah, this is the generation of the chart. What you put it out in is another thing entirely. I mean, an Excel or a PDF, those are the outputs. All right. These are graphs. All right. This is kind of like a report. All right. This is what you're creating. It's a bunch, instead of a bunch of columns and rows, this is a chart. And what you put it into ultimately can be can you put this in Excel? I would believe you can. Sure. Yes, you can. You can put this into a PDF. You can drop it in. Obviously, this is an HTML for sure. You can put it anywhere. Right? And for today, I believe that's all I've got. Now, this is the language. A little later in the year, I'm going to dive in a little deeper in the JavaScript and go through some of the functionality that we have there when you start to play with JavaScript to adjust things, because that's you can get quite creative there. And there are some very interesting samples of things that have been done that we'll spend some time taking a look at, because they are actually quite useful. They're not the kind of thing that you can do in the tool, but that's the whole point. You know, if you could do it in the tool, you wouldn't need to, I wouldn't need to tell you about it, but there are things that are useful, and that probably will be in November. So, all right. Any other questions?
We appreciate you guys staying with us for the whole hour and a half. We hope you got something out of it. We love seeing all of you here.
Yep.
Yeah, hi, this is Dipesh. I have a quick question. You all might have covered it already. I might have missed it. If that's the case, sorry. What is the essential difference between the graph file and the table file?
What's the essential difference between table and graph?
The output.
Is yes, literally the output. Table is a language that's used to create columnar data formats. You're working with numbers in displaying data, and that data could be textual or it could be numbers. Graph basically is a language that's designed to use these same mechanisms, but the output is going to be in a graphic format. Right, and
It's always going to be graphic, means like pie charts and graphs and all that. Means if you're working on that, then use graph. Otherwise, for everything else, table.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Okay,
yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right.
Please fill out the evaluations. They help our ego, but also help us know what you guys want to hear from us.
Okay, guys.
I'm going to stop the recording.
And we'll see you next month.
Have a great summer, everyone.